She ran through the heavy snow, breath breaking, hands shaking, her sleeves still stained with blood, knowing if she stopped, she might not survive. When she finally stepped onto the last train, she believed she had escaped. But when the doors opened, he was already there, watching her like he knew exactly where she would run, and in that moment, she realized this had never been an escape. What he didn't notice was the man a few rows away, a former Marine, and at his feet, a K9 that didn't see a couple, only a threat. And in the next few seconds, everything was about to change. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Snow buried Tacoma under a relentless winter storm as the last commuter train forced its way through the dark. Mara Bennett stepped inside without looking back because she knew exactly what would happen if she did. She would slow down, she would hesitate, and hesitation was the one thing Dylan had always been better at exploiting than anything else. So she kept moving, shoulders tight, breath shallow, forcing her legs to carry her forward even though every instinct told her to turn around and check the platform one more time. She was 28, small-framed, and worn down in a way that didn't come from time but from pressure. Her dark brown hair damp and clinging to her face in loose curls from the snow. Her skin pale under the cold fluorescent lights. And there was a bruise along her jaw she kept hidden beneath a thick wool scarf she adjusted again and again without thinking. A habit that had long outlived the moments that created it. Her hand stayed locked around a small canvas bag, fingers tight enough to ache, because inside it was everything she had left that still mattered. Documents, a charger, one spare shirt, nothing more. Because leaving hadn't been planned, it had been a break, a moment where staying suddenly felt more dangerous than whatever came next. She chose her seat fast, near the door, angled toward the window so she could watch the reflection behind her without turning her head, placing herself where she could move if she had to, because even now she didn't believe she was safe, not really, not yet, maybe not at all. The doors shut behind her with a heavy sound that echoed too loud in the near-empty carriage, and for a second she let herself breathe, just once, before her body tightened again because silence didn't mean safety, it meant nothing had happened yet. The train began to move, slow at first, then steady, and Mara kept her eyes on the glass, not on the snow outside, but on the reflection inside, counting shapes, tracking movement, measuring distance, because that was how she survived now. Not by trusting, not by relaxing, but by always knowing where everything was. Dylan's voice sat in her head like it had never left, calm, controlled, not loud, never loud. And that was what made it worse, because anger could pass, but certainty stayed. And he had been certain when he said she didn't get to leave, certain in a way that made it sound less like a threat and more like something already decided. She pressed her fingers harder into the strap of her bag, grounding herself, reminding herself that she had walked out, that she was here, that distance meant something, even if it didn't feel like it yet. 3 rows ahead, a man shifted, just slightly, just enough to change the line of the aisle, and Mara noticed it instantly without looking directly, catching it through the reflection the way she caught everything now. He didn't move like the others, no restless motion, no distracted habits, just stillness that looked natural instead of forced, like his body had learned long ago not to waste energy on unnecessary movement. Noah Mercer was 39, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that came from years of disciplined use rather than display. His dark blonde hair cut short in a clean military style, a trimmed beard outlining a sharp jaw, and a faint scar near his eyebrow that hinted at a past that had shaped him in ways he didn't need to explain. He had spent years as a U.S. Marine, and that kind of experience didn't leave you when you stepped out of uniform. It stayed in how you sat, how you watched, how quickly you noticed when something was wrong. And right now, he was noticing. At his feet, the dog lifted its head. That was the moment Mara felt it shift. Ranger didn't react like a normal dog. Didn't bark, didn't move forward. He just focused. Completely, his ears tilting forward, his body steady, his gaze fixed on her as if he was reading something she couldn't hide, and the longer he looked, the more it felt like he understood exactly what she was trying to keep buried. The German Shepherd was large, solid, built for control rather than chaos, his thick amber and black fur catching the dim light, his posture calm but ready, the kind of presence that didn't need to show force to make itself known. He inhaled slowly, once, processing scent, tension, something deeper than movement, and Mara felt her stomach tighten because animals had never been wrong. Not once, not about Dylan, not about danger. Noah followed the dog's focus with a glance that lasted less than a second, quick, precise, enough to take in the details without staring. The scarf pulled too high, the tightness in her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was bracing for something that hadn't happened yet, and he understood enough. He didn't speak, didn't approach, didn't make the mistake of forcing interaction where it wasn't wanted, because men like him knew that stepping in too soon could make things worse. Instead, when the train finned at the next stop, he shifted his position just slightly, moving one seat closer to the aisle, placing himself between her and the rest of the carriage without blocking her exit, just enough to change the path someone would have to take to reach her, and Ranger adjusted with him without command, aligning beside his leg, quiet, controlled, a barrier without aggression. Mara noticed immediately. Her grip tightened, her breath shortened, because this was how it started. Small changes, subtle control. That was how Dylan had done it too. But Noah didn't look at her again, didn't speak, didn't move closer. He just stayed there, present, steady. Not asking anything from her, not pulling her in, and that didn't fit the pattern she knew, and not understanding something was sometimes worse than fear. The train pushed deeper into the night, the city fading into darkness and snow, and Mara reached into her pocket before stopping halfway, her fingers hovering over her phone because turning it on meant opening a door she wasn't ready to face. Dylan would be there, he always was. Messages, calls, that quiet pressure that didn't need proximity to exist. He didn't chase like other people, he waited. He let you run until you ran out of space, and then he was there. Tonight she had walked out, and for a moment she thought that meant something had changed. Then Ranger stood. The movement was instant, controlled, a low growl building in his chest as Noah's head turned and Mara followed the line of sight without thinking, and everything inside her dropped into silence, because the train was already slowing, and outside, under the harsh yellow lights cutting through the snow, a figure moved along the edge of the platform, scanning each passing window with the kind of focus that didn't come from searching, but from knowing. And she didn't need to see his face clearly to understand it was Dylan. Already there, already waiting, exactly the way he always did when he believed she had nowhere else to go. And her breath caught sharp in her chest as the old instinct tried to drag her backward, telling her maybe she had made a mistake, maybe she had pushed too far. But the thought collapsed the instant she saw him clearly, because nothing had changed. Not him, not the way he looked at her, not the quiet certainty written all over his face, the certainty that this would end the way it always had, that he would find her, that he would take her back. And as the train slowed further, metal grinding beneath them and the doors preparing to open, the space between them shrinking into something she couldn't outrun, Ranger stepped forward, Noah stood, and Mara didn't move. Because in that moment, she understood something with absolute clarity. If she stepped off that train alone, she wasn't escaping anything, she was going back. The doors opened with a sharp mechanical hiss, and cold air rushed into the carriage as Dylan stepped inside like he had all the time in the world. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice, didn't act like a man chasing anything, and that was exactly what made Mara's chest tighten, because Dylan Cross never needed to look desperate to be dangerous. He was tall, composed, his dark hair still perfectly set despite the snow, his coat expensive and clean, the kind of man strangers would glance at and immediately assume he was in control of his life and everyone in it. And when he spoke, his voice carried that same smooth certainty, soft enough to sound caring, but sharp underneath. "Mara, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." Like this was a misunderstanding, like she had simply wandered off and he had come to bring her home. Mara didn't answer, her body already moving backward before her mind caught up, shoulders tightening, fingers digging into her bag, because she knew that tone better than anything. The calm before the grip, the softness before the control. And she could already feel the moment coming where his hand would close around her wrist and everything would collapse back into the same pattern she had barely escaped. Dylan took a step closer, slow, measured, as if he didn't need to hurry, as if the outcome was already decided, and his eyes flickered once, just once, losing that calm mask long enough to show the anger underneath, red, sharp, barely contained, before smoothing over again. Noah stood. He didn't move fast, didn't make a scene, didn't even raise his voice. He just stood up at the exact moment Dylan closed the distance, placing himself between them without touching either of them, his body aligned in a way that blocked access without aggression, and when he spoke, his tone was level, controlled, carrying no emotion but no hesitation either. "She doesn't look like she wants to go with you." It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a challenge. It was a statement, simple and direct, and somehow that made Dylan stop more effectively than force would have. Ranger moved with him, stepping forward just enough that his body lined up beside Noah's leg, his posture no longer relaxed, muscles taut, ears forward, eyes fixed on Dylan, not barking, not lunging, but clearly ready. The kind of controlled tension that came from years of training, not instinct, and it changed the air in the carriage immediately. The few remaining passengers had already gone quiet, watching without getting involved, and somewhere farther down the train someone pulled out a phone, not to record, but to call. Dylan's smile tightened slightly, the first crack in his composure, and his eyes flicked to Noah, measuring him quickly, taking in posture, stance, the dog, calculating risk the way men like him always did. "This is a private matter," he said, still calm, still controlled, but the softness was thinning. "She's my wife." The word hung there, heavy, like it was supposed to end the conversation, like it was supposed to override everything else. Noah didn't move, didn't step back, didn't escalate. "She still doesn't want to go with you." That was it. No extra words, no argument, just a boundary. For a second, Dylan looked like he might push forward anyway, his hand flexing slightly at his side, the old pattern about to reassert itself, take control, force the outcome he expected. But before he could move, a voice cut through the tension from behind. "Sir, step back." Two transit security officers had entered from the next carriage, called in by passengers who had seen enough to know something was wrong. The first was a middle-aged man with a stocky build, shaved head, and a firm, practiced presence, the kind of officer who had dealt with situations like this before and knew how quickly they could turn. His name badge read Officer Ramirez, and his eyes moved quickly between Mara, Dylan, Noah, and the dog, assessing the situation without jumping to conclusions. Behind him was a younger officer, leaner, alert, his hand already near his radio. Dylan straightened slightly, resetting his posture, smoothing his expression back into something more controlled, more presentable. "It's fine," he said smoothly. "My wife is just upset. I'm taking her home." He reached again, slower this time, as if trying to make the motion look harmless. Mara flinched. It was small, but it was enough. Officer Ramirez saw it immediately. "Ma'am," he said, his tone shifting, no longer neutral. "Do you want to go with him?" That was the moment everything balanced on. Mara's throat tightened, her chest rising too fast, her mind pulling in two directions at once, one telling her to stay quiet, to avoid making it worse, to not trigger him. The other pushing back, louder than it had ever been before, reminding her that staying quiet was how it always continued. Her voice came out shaky, almost breaking, but it came out. "No." It wasn't loud, it wasn't strong, but it was clear. Dylan's expression changed instantly, the calm dropping for a split second, something sharper breaking through before he forced it back under control. But it was too late, the officers had seen enough. "Step away from her, sir," Ramirez said, firmer now. Dylan didn't argue further, not here, not like this, not with witnesses and authority involved. But the way he looked at Mara as he stepped back made it clear nothing about this was over. The train remained stopped longer than usual as the situation escalated properly, and within minutes, local transit police arrived at the platform, separating everyone, taking statements, documenting details. Mara stood off to the side, arms wrapped around herself, still shaking but no longer silent, answering questions in short, fragmented sentences, admitting what had been happening. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. Dylan denied everything. Of course he did. Calm, controlled, reasonable, but the cracks were there now, and they had seen them. Snow fell heavier outside, thickening, slowing movement, delaying everything. And when the officers discussed next steps, the problem became clear quickly. Mara had nowhere to go tonight, no immediate contact, no safe place within reach given the weather and time. That was when Noah spoke again. "There's a small house near my K-9 training site in Gig Harbor," he said, steady, direct, not pushing, just offering. "Secure doors, basic cameras, isolated enough that no one gets there by accident. She can stay there tonight. Tomorrow I'll help her contact a shelter and legal support." The officers exchanged a look. It made sense. It was immediate. It was practical. Ramirez nodded slowly, then turned to Mara. "Your choice." Everything still came back to that. Mara hesitated only a second this time. Then she nodded. Dylan was escorted off first, not arrested, but warned, documented, restricted, and as he stepped into the storm, he looked back once, just once, and the message in that look was clear. This wasn't finished. Not even close. Mara saw it, felt it, but for the first time, she didn't move toward him. She turned away, and followed Noah instead. The road to Gig Harbor was nearly empty under the weight of snow, and the truck headlights cut through the dark like a narrow path forward. Mara sat in silence in the passenger seat, her body still tense even though the distance between her and the station was growing with every mile. Because distance had never been enough before, and part of her still expected everything to collapse the moment she stopped paying attention. Noah drove without speaking, both hands steady on the wheel, his focus fixed on the road ahead, not ignoring her, but not watching her either, giving her space in a way that felt deliberate rather than distant. The truck itself was practical, an older model pickup with visible wear, the kind of vehicle used for work rather than appearance, and that alone told Mara something about the man beside her, that he valued function over impression, that he wasn't trying to present anything he wasn't. Ranger lay stretched across the back seat, head resting between the front seats, his presence steady and grounded, not intruding but always aware, his eyes opening briefly every time Mara shifted even slightly, then settling again once he registered no immediate threat. It was subtle, almost easy to miss, but Mara noticed it, and that quiet pattern began to settle somewhere in the back of her mind. Not trust, not yet, but something close to recognition. The house appeared gradually through the snow, not large, not hidden, just there. A small wooden structure sitting beside a fenced training field where faint outlines of equipment could be seen under the dim outdoor lights. It wasn't a fortress, wasn't isolated in a way that felt unnatural, but it wasn't exposed either, the kind of place that balanced privacy with visibility, and for Mara, that balance was unfamiliar enough to be unsettling. Motion sensors flickered on as the truck pulled in, soft light illuminating the yard, and a pair of mounted cameras turned slightly with the movement. Not aggressively, just enough to track presence. Noah parked and stepped out first, moving around the truck without rushing, opening Mara's door but stepping back immediately afterward, giving her space to decide when to move. Mara hesitated for half a second before stepping down, her boots crunching against the snow, her eyes moving quickly across the property, measuring, checking, trying to understand where she was and what could happen here. The training yard stretched beyond the fence, structured but quiet, and farther off, across a narrow divide, another building stood with faint light in the windows. "That's the night office," Noah said simply, not turning it into a conversation, just providing information. "Someone's there." Mara nodded once, not trusting her voice yet. Inside, the house was warm but not overly so, the heat steady, controlled, and the space was simple, clean, functional. A small living area with a couch, a table, a wood stove giving off low heat. No unnecessary decoration, nothing that suggested permanence, just a place meant to be used, not displayed. Noah moved through it without hesitation, setting a medical kit on the table, placing a clean folded sweater beside it, then pouring hot water into a mug and setting it down within reach but not directly in front of her. "You can lock the bedroom door," he said, his tone even. "Windows secured, cameras cover outside." That was all. No pressure, no expectation. Mara stood still for a moment, processing it, her body still waiting for something else, some hidden condition, some shift in tone that would reveal the real cost behind the offer, but nothing came. Ranger moved past her quietly, settling near the stove, his body relaxed but his head lifting again the moment she took a step, tracking her without making it obvious. She picked up the sweater, then the mug, then the medical kit. Each action felt deliberate, like testing something she didn't fully understand yet. The bedroom door closed behind her, and she locked it immediately, then checked it again, then once more, her hands moving automatically, the habit too ingrained to ignore. She dragged a chair slightly closer to the door without realizing she was doing it, then stopped, catching herself, her breath uneven again. The room was quiet, no footsteps, no voice, no pressure. That was new. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands, noticing how tightly they were still clenched, how her shoulders hadn't dropped even once since she left the apartment. And for the first time since everything began, she felt the weight of it. Not fear exactly, but exhaustion, deep and constant, the kind that didn't go away with sleep because it wasn't physical. Outside, the storm continued, wind pushing snow against the windows, and for the first time in years, Mara realized no one was coming through the door. Not yet. Morning came slowly, gray light filtering through the windows, and Noah was already awake, moving through the space quietly, preparing to leave without making it feel like a transition she had to follow. He drove her to the hospital in Tacoma, the process clinical and direct, documenting injuries, recording evidence, each step grounding the situation in something real, something that could be used, something that moved beyond fear into action. From there, he introduced her to a woman waiting in a small office near the support center, someone who immediately changed the tone of the situation. Angela Ruiz was in her early 40s, average height, with dark hair pulled back neatly and a calm, steady presence that didn't push or overwhelm. Her face carried the kind of composure that came from years of working with people in crisis, not hardened, but practiced, her voice soft without being fragile, direct without being cold. She didn't rush Mara, didn't ask everything at once, just guided the conversation in a way that made space for answers instead of forcing them out. "This is a process," Angela said, her tone measured, "not one decision. You already made the hardest step." Mara listened, her hands still tense in her lap, but something in the structure of it, the clarity, the absence of pressure, made it easier to stay present. Outside of that room, Dylan Cross wasn't waiting anymore. He was moving. He didn't have access to cameras, didn't have any official way to track her, but he didn't need it. He relied on what he had always relied on: observation, memory, pattern. The night before, he had seen the logo on Noah's jacket, the name on the truck door, and that was enough to narrow things down. A few searches, a few connections, and the location became clear. Not exact, but close enough. A K-9 training facility near Gig Harbor. That was all he needed. He didn't know which house. He didn't need to. He just needed to know she was there, and that she wasn't alone. Snow kept falling over Gig Harbor, thick and heavy, swallowing sound and stretching the distance between things until even a moving vehicle could disappear if you didn't know exactly where to look. And Dylan Cross used that to his advantage as he drove slowly past the edge of the K-9 training grounds. Headlights dimmed, engine steady, not rushing, not circling too obviously, because he had never been the kind of man who acted without thinking. He was 34, sharp-featured, clean-cut, the kind of man who knew how to control his expression in public and weaponize it in private. And right now, his face was still, almost calm, but underneath that calm sat something much darker, an obsession built over years of needing control, of believing that losing it meant losing everything, and Mara had been the center of that control for too long for him to accept it breaking in a single night. He didn't need a group, didn't need help, because to him, this wasn't a fight, it was a correction, a situation that had gone off track and needed to be forced back into place. He parked farther down the road, cutting the engine and stepping out into the cold, his boots sinking slightly into the snow as he moved on foot, keeping to the darker edges of the property, eyes scanning the layout, the fence lines, the small structures near the training yard, the pattern of lights turning on and off as sensors reacted to movement in the wind. He remembered what he had seen the night before, the logo on Noah's jacket, the truck, the direction they had driven, and now it was enough, not exact, but close, and close was all he needed. He waited, watched, timed the intervals between motion lights, noting where shadows held longer, where the angle of the buildings gave him cover, and then he moved toward the back of the nearest house, staying low, controlled, patient, the way he always was when he believed the outcome was already his. Inside, Mara sat across from Noah at the table. The statement nearly finished, her handwriting still uneven, but more consistent than before. Because something had shifted in her since the train. Not fear disappearing, but fear no longer deciding everything for her. Noah didn't rush her, didn't fill the silence, just sat there, steady, present, occasionally glancing at the time, at the paper, at nothing in particular, giving her the space to finish something she had never been able to say out loud before. Ranger lay near the stove, body relaxed at first glance, but his ears kept moving slightly, tracking the environment beyond the walls, and that was the first sign. Then he stood. Not abruptly, not with noise, just rising in one controlled motion, head turning sharply toward the back door, muscles tightening under his coat, and the low growl that formed in his chest was not loud but carried weight. A warning that came from recognition, not guesswork. Mara froze instantly, the pen stopping mid-line, her breath catching as her body reacted before her thoughts could form. And Noah was already on his feet, not rushing, not panicking, but moving with immediate intent, his eyes following the same direction as the dog. Someone was outside. Not walking openly, moving carefully, trying not to be seen. Noah crossed to the front door first and locked it, then checked the side window without exposing himself, his movements precise, efficient, before turning back to Mara, his voice low but firm. "Bedroom, now, lock it, call 911, tell them forced entry in progress." There was no hesitation in his tone, no uncertainty, just instruction, and that was enough to cut through the panic building in her chest. Mara moved. Her legs felt unsteady, her hands shaking as she grabbed her phone. But she didn't freeze, didn't hesitate, because something inside her had changed, something small but solid enough to hold on to. And as she reached the bedroom and locked the door behind her, she dialed with trembling fingers but steady intent. Outside, Dylan reached the back door and tested the handle once, quietly, then again, harder, confirming what he already expected. Locked. His jaw tightened slightly. Then he stepped back and brought the metal bar up. The first hit cracked through the wood. Inside the house, the sound landed like a shockwave, and Mara flinched but didn't drop the phone, her voice shaking as the call connected. "There's someone trying to break in," she said, forcing the words out clearly. "He's my husband. He's been abusive. He's outside my house. I need police now." Another hit, louder, more force. "Mara!" Dylan's voice broke through next, no longer controlled, no longer smooth, anger and urgency bleeding through at the same time. "Open the door! You don't need to do this!" The tone shifted quickly, desperation folding into something softer, manipulative, familiar. "Just talk to me, that's all. We can fix this. You're overreacting. Just open the door." Mara pressed herself against the wall, her body shaking, but she stayed on the call, repeating the address, confirming the situation, not answering him, not engaging, and that alone marked the difference. In the main room, Noah didn't stand directly in front of the door. He stayed off angle, watching the frame, the lock, the point of impact, because he knew standing in line with forced entry was how you lost control of the situation. Ranger stood beside him, no longer still, his body coiled, growl deeper now, eyes locked on the door as the next hit came. The lock shifted. Wood splintered slightly. Then the gap opened just enough. Dylan forced his arm through, reaching for the handle, the metal bar still in his grip, trying to pry the door wider, his movements no longer controlled, just driven by the need to force his way in. That was the line. "Ranger." The command was quiet, immediate. The dog launched forward, fast and precise, jaws locking onto Dylan's forearm, targeting the arm holding the weapon, not tearing, not thrashing, just holding with trained pressure, enough to stop the motion, enough to force release. Dylan shouted, the bar dropping from his hand as he tried to pull back, but Ranger held for a second longer, just enough to break the attempt. Noah stepped in then, not to strike, not to escalate, but to close the door, forcing it shut with controlled force and locking it again, securing the barrier, maintaining distance, ending the breach without turning it into a fight. Outside, Dylan stumbled back into the snow, shouting, his control completely gone now, replaced by raw anger and frustration, and for the first time, the situation was no longer something he controlled. Lights snapped on across the property, motion sensors triggered, cameras tracking, and from across the training yard, a figure moved quickly toward the house. Ethan Cole, mid-30s, tall and lean with sharp features and a constant alertness shaped by years working around trained K-9 units, had heard the impact and responded immediately, his pace controlled but urgent, his eyes already assessing before he reached the door. The sound of sirens followed, cutting through the storm. Inside the bedroom, Mara slid down against the wall, still holding the phone, still breathing hard, but she hadn't stopped, hadn't broken, hadn't gone silent. "I'm here," she said into the call, voice shaking but clear, "and I'm not letting him in." And that was the moment everything changed. The storm cleared, but the cold stayed, settling into the ground like something that refused to leave completely. And by the time morning light reached the house near the K-9 training yard, Everything that had happened the night before had already begun turning into something else. Something structured, recorded, and impossible to erase. Dylan Cross was processed without resistance, not because he accepted what was happening, but because he understood that control didn't always look like force. Sometimes it meant waiting for a better moment. And that calculation still lived behind his eyes, even as he sat under fluorescent lights at the station, his posture composed, his expression steady, his voice measured as he spoke to officers, trying to reshape the narrative the way he always had. But this time, the structure around him didn't bend. There were timestamps that aligned too cleanly, camera footage showing his path through the property, the motion sensors activating in sequence, the damaged door frame photographed in detail, the metal bar recovered where it had fallen in the snow, and most importantly, Mara's call recorded in real time, her voice identifying him, describing the attempt, asking for help without hesitation, and that combination created something he couldn't talk his way out of. The charges were clear enough to hold: threats, attempted forced entry, property damage, and violation of prior warning from the train incident. And for the first time, what he had always dismissed as temporary consequences began to look more permanent. Mara didn't see him again after that night, not at the station, not at the holding area, not even from a distance, because the process shifted quickly into something designed to keep space between them. And that space mattered more than anything else. She moved through the next hours in a state that felt detached but focused, answering questions, confirming details, repeating parts of her statement in clearer terms. And each time she spoke, it became easier to stay in the present instead of slipping back into the patterns she had lived in for years. At the hospital, the documentation continued, each bruise recorded, each mark described clinically, the language precise and unemotional. And that precision gave weight to something that had always been dismissed as private, something that now existed in records that couldn't be rewritten. From there, she was guided back to the support center, where Angela Ruiz met her again. The same calm presence, dark hair tied back, steady gaze, a woman shaped by years of working with people who arrived exactly like this, shaken but standing. And she didn't overwhelm Mara with comfort or questions. She just laid out what came next in a way that made it possible to follow. "You don't need to rush the feeling," Angela said quietly, watching her hands, noticing the tension still there, but also the control returning in small ways. "You just need to keep making decisions that move you forward." Mara nodded, and this time the movement felt deliberate, not automatic. By midday, arrangements were in place for her transfer to a secure shelter location, not far enough to feel like she had disappeared, but far enough that no one could simply walk in, a place with controlled access, monitored entry, and staff trained to maintain boundaries without making the environment feel like confinement. The building itself was simple, clean, a converted residential structure with reinforced locks and discreet security measures, and the woman who checked her in introduced herself with a quiet professionalism that didn't push too hard. Her name was Lisa Carter, early 50s, average height, short gray-streaked hair, her posture relaxed but observant. Someone who had learned over time how to read a person's state without asking too many questions. And she explained the basics in a steady tone, where things were, how the system worked, what Mara could control and what she didn't need to worry about yet. Mara stepped into the room that would be hers for now, a small space with a bed, a desk, a window that faced a quiet courtyard, and most importantly, a door she could lock from the inside without anyone having a key to override it casually. And that detail alone made something shift inside her, subtle but real. She set her bag down slowly, looking around as if expecting something to change, something to reveal itself as conditional, but nothing did. And for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like a pause before something bad happened. It felt like space. Noah didn't follow her there. He didn't try to stay involved beyond what was necessary, and that mattered more than anything else, because it confirmed something she hadn't fully understood until now, that help didn't always come with a cost. He had done what needed to be done, stood where he needed to stand, and then stepped back when it was time for her to move on her own, and that made his presence feel real instead of overwhelming. Ranger remained with him, of course, returning to the training yard, to routines that didn't change, but the memory of that steady, controlled presence stayed with Mara, not as dependence, but as a reference point, something her mind could return to when everything else felt uncertain. The days that followed weren't easy, not clean, not free of fear, but they were different, structured around small decisions instead of reactions. Mara still startled when doors closed too loudly, still felt her chest tighten when footsteps approached from behind, still woke some nights with her heart racing before she even understood why, but those moments didn't control what came next anymore. She attended scheduled meetings, reviewed paperwork, signed documents that once would have felt impossible, statements, requests for protective orders, confirmations that she did not want contact, and each signature carried weight, not just legally, but internally, because each one reinforced the same decision in a different form. Weeks later, she returned to the station, not because she had to, because she chose to. The snow had melted into thin patches along the edges of the platform, the air still cold but no longer heavy, and for a moment she stood there, just breathing, just letting the memory surface without pushing it away. The train doors opened with the same sound, the same rush of air, and her body reacted for a split second, tightening, remembering, but it didn't hold her in place. She stepped forward, steady, deliberate, her shoulders not drawn in, her gaze not lowered, and as she crossed the threshold, there was no hesitation, no second thought. Across the parking lot, at a distance that felt right, Noah moved with Ranger beside him after a morning session, the dog steady, alert, part of a routine that didn't need to change, and they didn't approach, didn't interrupt, because they didn't need to. Mara saw them, just briefly, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she needed anything from that moment except to continue. She stepped onto the train, on her own, and she didn't look back. Sometimes the miracle isn't a sudden rescue. It's the moment you find the strength God placed inside you and choose not to go back. In everyday life, we wait for signs, for something big to change everything. But often, God works quietly, giving you courage, clarity, and one small step forward when you need it most. That step becomes your way out. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need that same strength today. Comment below where you're watching from. I'll keep you in my prayers. Subscribe for more stories about faith, resilience, and second chances. May God protect you, guide your path, and give you strength in whatever you are facing right now.